Yokoso owashitare. Welcome back to another video going over some of the classical Japanese poetry that's found in Genshin. Specifically, we are going to be looking at yet another poem that Kazuha references when he does one of his bursts. When he does his burst. Now, I will say, if you haven't seen the previous two videos, please go check those out. Especially the first one, because the first one in particular contains a lot of relevant information, where these poems come from, why it's significant, why Kazuha is named Kazuha, and why his name is written the way that it is, which is all very fascinating, and it all references classical Japanese poetry, which is great. But please go check those out if you haven't, because there may be some information in there that will make a little more sense when you're going over this video. But without any further ado, let me introduce to you the quote that Kazuha says when he does his burst, which is... So if you didn't hear it particularly clearly, what he says is Momijiba o chiramaku o shimi. Now what the heck does that mean? Specifically, that quote is referencing this poem here from the Manyoshu, which again, if you want to know what the Manyoshu is, please check out the first video that I did with Kazuha, where I explain where that is, where it comes from, why it's important, yada 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 yada. Specifically, this is poem number 1586 from the 8th scroll, the 8th collection. You can think of it kind of like a chapter. But the full poem is Momijiba o chiramaku o shimi, taori kite, koyoe kazashitsu, Nanika omo wam. And then some little extra information about this poem. For those of you who want a challenge, you can go ahead and look at this. This is how it was originally written in pure kanji, because this was back before they had hiragana or katakana, or the Japanese fully had an idea of how to use Chinese characters to write their language, so they basically just kind of wrote Chinese, and then you were just supposed to intuit it and read it in Japanese, which is really weird. It's really difficult, but for those of you who think you are super smart at Japanese, go ahead. Go ahead, take a stab at this, because yeah, it's rough. And then we also have the actual way that you would read it in with just hiragana, so you actually know how it's pronounced, or how it's supposedly pronounced. I mean, this was a long time ago when this was written, so we don't know for sure how they pronounced things, but we have a basic idea, we have a pretty good idea that it was probably something in the vicinity of what is written here. And anyway, one final bit of context that I want to go over is, who wrote this? Who is the guy who wrote this? Well, his name is Agata no Inukai no Sukune Mochiyo. That is a mouthful. And I'm not going to break down his name, even though basically his name is Inukai, okay? Which means carer of dogs, the dog care. Dog taker carer. But I looked up some information on this man, because I've never heard of this guy before. I didn't know who he was until I started looking into this poem. And it turns out that what's really fascinating and what will connect to Kazuha is that he was not a super high-ranking nobleman. I mean, he was a nobleman because he ended up in a collection of classical Japanese poetry. And so no doubt he was probably hanging out with some high-ranking people. Well, he was hanging out with some high-ranking people. But he was a warrior. He served some of the emperors, I believe, some of the princes, some of the high nobility, some of the royal family, but he was a fighter. He was a warrior. He wasn't just a regular frou-frou aristocrat who sat around and only wrote poetry and mused on the fleeting nature of life. I mean, he certainly mused on the fleeting nature of life, but he also kicked butt. Anyway, we'll get more into that later at the end when I explain why this is relevant to Kazuha, but let's break down the poem as per usual. And we'll try to be a little bit quicker about it, because if you've seen the previous two videos, you already have an idea. You probably can recognize some of these patterns, so I'm not going to dwell on things too awfully long. Anyway, here we go. So the first word in this poem, momijiba, is technically a combination of two words. Momiji, which means maple leaf. If you remember in the previous video where we talked about momiji basically just means leaves that have changed color to their autumn color. So red leaves, yellow leaves, orange leaves, etc. And then we have this ba, which is normally read ha, but because it's combined with the momiji, you read it ba. That's just a characteristic of Japanese. When you have a noun that follows another noun, the second noun gets voiced, at least the first syllable is voiced, so ha becomes ba. Anyway, that's beside the point. Basically, momiji ba just means maple leaves. Leaves that have changed turn into the autumn colors. And then momijiba is followed by the object marking particle, the particle o, which basically again just marks the object, which means that the momijiba is going to be the thing that receives the action of the sentence, and the action being chiramaku. Now, chiramaku comes from the root verb chiru, which means to scatter. So if you watched Bleach, when Byakuya uses his bankai and he says chire senbon sakura, he means scatter. Scatter in the sense that like the leaf petals of sakura scatter through the wind. So you can take that and apply it to this. So momijiba o chiru means the autumn leaves scatter. Now, what we do here, and this is a little bit of an older conjugation here that we have, because we take it from chiru to chira, so then we can add this maku. Now what this does is this, I believe the technical term is nominalizes it. It takes a verb and turns it into a noun. So you can read this first part as momijiba o chiramaku is the scattering of the autumn leaves. And then that is followed by the verb, or rather it's a verb that is turned into a noun in a different way, oshimi. It comes from the root verb oshimu, which means to regret, to be upset about. And by extension, kind of in a connected sense and a little bit more of an extended meaning, to long for. Because you are worried about a thing, because he is worried about the scattering of the autumn leaves. So, momijiba o chiramaku o shimi taori kite. Okay? So let's break this down. This first word, ta, which some of you people who know regular Japanese will read this as te. Te just means hand. It means hand. So like you can say, te zukuri. Zukuri means to make, so te zukuri means handmade. But we have it combined with the verb oru, or in this case it's conjugated as ori, so we can add this kite on the end, but we'll get to that. But the root verb oru means to fold, more literally. But when you think about if you fold a branch, right? If you take a branch of a tree and you fold it, it's going to snap off. And so what he's saying is that regretting or longing for the autumn leaves, taori, folding, hand folding, which means to pluck off, kite. Kite, it comes from the root verb ku. In classical Japanese and modern Japanese we say kuru, but it comes from the verb ku, and then we have it conjugated into this kite, so we can add this te onto it, which means that the sentence is not over, but ki or ku means to come. So basically this first part means regretting the scattering of the autumn leaves, I come to handpick them. I come to handpick. It doesn't exactly say them because this is Japanese, so we're not going to say that we're handpicking specifically the autumn leaves because it's just assumed. So that's basically the first sentence, the first clause of this poem. Then we have koyoi kazashitsu is the next line. Koyoi is a combination of two words. This word means ima, but in the way it's conjugated, in the way you combine it with other things, sometimes it just becomes ko. It means now, at this moment. Or you can kind of think of it as the next, because it's combined with this yoi, or yo, is another way that you can read it. In modern Japanese, you'd read it as yoru, but here we have yoi. So you have koyoi means tonight, this night, or this next night, rather. And then it's followed by the word kazashitsu, which is a verb. However, it's conjugated in a way so we can add this tsu on the end of it. Now, this comes from the root verb kazasu, which means to decorate. It's where we get the word in modern Japanese for kazari, which is a decoration. So to kazasu is to decorate a thing. And specifically in this instance, it is referring to putting something in your hair, putting something on a headdress or something like that so you can wear it on your head. However, we go from kazasu, which is the infinitive, it's the regular form of the verb, and we turn it into kazashi, so we can add this tsu on the end of it. Now, this is a really interesting thing that I'm not entirely sure what it's getting at. I'm not entirely sure how this verb is being conjugated, or rather, I don't really know how to explain it. Because this tsu denotes completion. It's almost a past tense thing, but not quite. It means to do something completely. Now, the thing about it is because reading this poem, I can't imagine this person is going out at night to pick a branch of leaves off of the tree to maintain the falling leaves because he regrets the scattering of the autumn leaves. However, what I think this guy is saying is that at night, once it becomes night, he is going to, because the Japanese technically don't have a future tense, he is going to stick a piece of maple leaves, a branch of maple leaves in his hair and use that to decorate his head so he can keep it with him. And then the final line here that we have is nanika omowamu. Now, this first word, nani, means what. If you guys study regular Japanese, you're definitely going to know nani. And then we have this particle ka. Now, in modern Japanese, the way we do it, if you want to turn a sentence into a question, you just stick ka on the end of the sentence and then poof, bada bing, bada boom, it's a question now. But in classical Japanese, the ka generally followed after the subject, but it was usually within the sentence, and then as soon as you saw that particle, then you would know that the sentence is a question. So nani means what, and then ka just denotes that this is a question. And specifically, like so many instances in classical Japanese poetry, when there's a question, it's usually a rhetorical question. He's not actually asking this as a sincere thing like, oh no, what is this? And he says nani ka, and then this is followed by omowamu, which if you've seen previous videos, omo means to think. The root verb here is omo in classical and modern Japanese. But omo means to think, but under that umbrella of think is so many things. It means to worry about, to love, to think fondly of. And in this case, it's mostly referring to being concerned about something, being worried about something, which actually contrasts nicely with the beginning where he says oshimi. Oshimu is to be worried about something, is to regret or to be sad about, whereas omowamu in this instance is basically the same thing. However, what he's doing is he's asking a rhetorical question. Nani ka what? Omowamu. Now, the root verb omo is the root verb, and then we conjugate it into this omowa, so then we can add this conjecture or this suppositional, I guess you can say, mu. Now, basically what this does is it adds a little bit of uncertainty. And the reason why we conjugate it like this is because, again, we are asking a rhetorical question. Nani ka omowamu? What will I fear? What will I consider? What will I think about? What will I be worried about? Or we have it in this speculative form because we don't know. And it's very unlikely that something in the future is going to come out and make us concerned or make this guy concerned about something. So he's basically just asking a rhetorical question. What do I have to fear? So one more time, going over the whole thing. Momijiba o chiramaku o shimi. Regretting the scattering of the autumn leaves. Taori kite. I come to pick off by hand a branch with maple leaves onto it. And that part is assumed. It just says, I come to pick off a branch. Koyoi kazashitsu. Tonight I will put it in my hair. I will wear it in my hair. Nanika omowamu. What do I have to be worried about? Beautiful poem, beautiful poem. I absolutely love it. I mean, autumn is my favorite time of year. Obviously, you can't tell. My favorite color is red. And again, I'd like to point out that contrast where the writer is worried about the scattering of the leaves, but now that he has some of the leaves in his hand and he has it in his head, he is also not worried about it. Now, of course, this being poetry, you can connect it to all sorts of metaphors. Maybe what he is saying is that for a long time he had a lover that he was desperately trying to marry, but now that he has finally married her, he is so happy and he's peaceful and contented. I'll leave the speculation and the extended metaphoring to all of you guys. But how does this relate to Kazuha? Well, number one, Kazuha's emblem, Kazuha's big motif is maple leaves. You can see it in his design. You can see it's all over his kimono. You can see it in the trailer. Maple leaves are his thing, which is a very Japanese sentiment. Now in the West, we tend to think that the big symbol of Japanese culture and Japanese natural beauty is the scattering of sakura blossoms, which, don't get me wrong, is very pretty, and the ancient Japanese did write about that. However, in the ancient times, there was more of a collective agreement that fall and autumn was actually the most beautiful of the seasons because it's got more of a sad, touching kind of a meaning, where spring everything is coming back alive and woo, that's great, but autumn where everything is slowly dying, but it's dying in this beautiful way, that just has this extra, I don't know how you want to say it, this extra tragic poetry about it. And so because of that, the Japanese tended to celebrate autumn. And so the maple leaf, which is the big symbol of autumn in Japanese nature, that's the big, beautiful motif that they all go back to. It's very interesting that they put that to Kazuha, because Kazuha is an anemo user. You would think that he would have some sort of green coloration, some sort of green symbolism or green worked into his design, but instead it's replaced by dark oranges, reds, and even some dark browns. And then, of course, there's the fact that Kazuha is actually pretty down to earth. He's pretty chill. He's found his peace. He's just big chillin' and just a chill guy. I don't know how many times I have to say the word chill, but he's chill. And then the last really interesting thing, and I don't know if this was intentional, I'm pretty sure they chose this from the Manyoshu, and they specifically chose it with the autumn leaf motif because that fits Kazuha very well. But also, the writer of this poem, like I mentioned, was a warrior. And that's just perfectly emblematic of the traditional Japanese, well, I say traditional Japanese, the warrior society didn't really get its like grounding, wasn't really a hardcore thing until maybe the late 1400s, early 1500s, something around there. But this points to the concept of a warrior and a poet, the scholar and the fighter, and how the perfect, I guess you could say, man, according to ancient Japanese traditions, was somebody who could kick butt and take names, but also could sit down and compose a poem that would make the people around him weep with absolute feeling. And so I don't know if that was intentional, if they intentionally chose this one to represent Kazuha, because Kazuha is a warrior, he's a fighter, but also somebody who really likes poetry. But whether it was intentional or not, I love that it's in there because it does reflect more about who Kazuha is and what he does. Okay, and I'm going to be done there. This video actually is probably going to be a little longer than I anticipated because I like yapping and I can't help myself. But if you did enjoy it, if you found it informative, please don't forget to like the video. Please subscribe to the channel because there's still at least one more poem that I want to get to with Kazuha, and then there's stuff from other games because once we're done with Kazuha, I don't know any other instances of notable classical Japanese in Genshin, but there are other games. There's like Okami, there's some stuff from Street Fighter, there's some stuff from Guilty Gear, and all sorts of things that I will eventually get to. And also, of course, the main thing that I do here is I translate stories from the Konjaku Monogatari Shu, a collection of classical Japanese folktales from 1,000 years ago, and I put them into English, and I put them up here for your viewing enjoyment and for your education in Japanese culture. And please share this with your friends, share this with your Genshin friends, share this with your poetry-loving friends, share this with your weeb friends, just share with everybody, get the word out a little bit. Anyways, if you have been watching all the way up to the end here, I thank you sincerely, Ito katajike no koso haberikere, and hopefully we will see you for the next and final instance of Kazuha repeating classical Japanese poetry in the next video, but until then, have a good one guys, see you later.